Welcome back. And now for the news in detail. The UN Security Council will today discuss India's unilateral revocation of occupied Kashmir's UN-recognized status as a disputed territory. Last meeting was held in the year 1965. This comes after Pakistan wrote a letter to the Council calling for an emergency meeting on the issue. China backed Pakistan's call for the UNSC gathering to discuss India's illegal move. Pakistan's permanent UN representative Malia Lodi says the Security Council needs to reaffirm its commitment to its own resolutions. She says in today's meeting, Security Council members will be guided by the UN's statement saying the status of Kashmir should not be altered. Meanwhile, the Dominican Republic's Foreign Minister Miguel Octavio Vargas has assured his Pakistani counterpart of full support on the Kashmir issue. India's government has told its Supreme Court the lockdown of occupied Kashmir will continue, responding to a petition calling for the immediate lifting of a curfew and media blackout. New Delhi told the court to trust its security agencies. India's Supreme Court was scheduled to hear two petitions against the annexation and lockdown of occupied Kashmir. A lawyer has challenged the scrapping of Article 370, while a journalist has sought the end of the communications blackout in occupied Kashmir. In separate appeals, the petitioners rejected the annexation as illegal and called for freedom of expression in the occupied state. A three-judge bench is hearing the Kashmir lockdown case in New Delhi. The government told the top court it is reviewing the ground situation and will take a decision accordingly. Meanwhile, the Committee to Protect Journalists has asked the US officials to address the human rights crisis in occupied Kashmir. The press freedom watchdog is highlighting restrictions imposed by Indian security forces on local and the foreign journalists in the occupied territory. Moving on to North Korea, which has said it will never again sit down for peace talks with South Korea. The statement follows South Korean President Moon Jae-in's speech about reunifying Korean Peninsula by 2045. Pyongyang's Committee for the Peaceful Reunification of Country called the ongoing joint US-South Korean military drills a rehearsal for war. The committee says Seoul's participation in the war games is aimed at destroying North Korea. South Korea's Unification Ministry says Pyongyang's refusal to talk violates inter-Korean agreements. Meanwhile, South Korea's military says the North has test-fired two more missiles which landed into the sea off its eastern coast. This is the sixth such test in under a month. Gibraltar has freed an Iranian oil tanker detained last month over allegations of oil smuggling to Syria. The decision does not immediately indicate whether Grace 1 will be allowed to leave the British territory. Gibraltar's government took the decision despite a last-minute application by the US Justice Department to seize the tanker. Chief Minister Fabian Picardo says an independent legal body will consider the US request. He says Iran has promised not to allow the Grace 1 to sail to Syria in violation of European Union sanctions.
I received written assurances from the Republic of Iran that if released, the destination of the Grace 1 would not be an entity that is subject to European Union sanctions. I welcome that assurance. This is an important material change in the destination of the vessel and the potential beneficiary of its cargo.
The Iran state media denies giving any assurance to Gibraltar, claiming the tanker was never sailing for Syria. Meanwhile, Iran's Foreign Minister Javad Zarif says US attempt to seize Grace 1 is a piracy. Now moving on to Palestine, which has warned that Israeli calls to change the status quo at Jerusalem's flashpoint Al-Aqsa Mosque will lead to a religious war. Israel wants to change the status of the mosque to allow Jewish prayer, which would effectively turn it into a synagogue. Al-Aqsa Mosque is the third holiest site after Mecca and Medina for Muslims all over the world. In a statement, the Palestine Liberation Organization said Israel wants to divide the mosque. Palestine's Religious Affairs Ministry called on the international community to intervene as Israel's actions became provocative. The Turkish Foreign Ministry also rejected Israel's push to change the historical arrangements at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Hamas held an emergency meeting on the latest developments in Jerusalem, calling for national unity. Palestinian health officials say Israeli forces have killed a Palestinian teenager during protests against Israel's move. United States Congresswomen Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar have slammed Israel's decision to bar them from entering the country. They called the move a sign of weakness and an insult to democratic values. Omar says Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is under US pressure. She says Netanyahu has aligned himself with racists like Trump by blocking their visit. The two lawmakers plan to see the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem, which was later blocked by the Israeli government. The pair have voiced support for the pro-Palestinian boycott, divestment and sanctions movement. Syrian air defense forces have intercepted a missile over the city of Masyaf in northern Hama province. The military says the missile came from the direction of northern Lebanon. It says the missile was destroyed before it could hit the scientific research center in Masyaf, which has repeatedly been targeted by Israel. Some missile attacks on Syria have been launched by Israeli warplanes from Lebanese airspace. Israel's military spokesperson has declined to comment on the latest missile attack. A US delegation has visited the Turkish border town of Acakale to establish a joint operations center to oversee the Syria safe zone. The two NATO allies agreed last week to establish the center. No agreement has been announced by the US and Turkey on key details of the zone. Both the countries have planned a safe zone near the Turkish frontier that would be kept free of combatants and heavy weapons. Turkey says it will take military action if the United States fails to agree on a solution to safeguard the border. Thousands of people have marched in Yemen's port city of Aden to show their support for its takeover by southern separatists. The demonstrators demanded recognition of southerners' right to self-rule. Aden has been a temporary seat of Yemen's Saudi-backed government. Organizers say many demonstrators came from neighboring provinces to support secession. Marchers chanted pro-revolution slogans and waved South Yemen flags during rallies in Aden's Hormazkasar district. Southerners took over the city last week after clashes in which 40 people were killed and over 200 were injured. One worker has been killed and another injured in Libya after a missile hit the only functioning international airport in Tripoli. An official statement from Mitiga Airport says air traffic has been suspended till further notice. Earlier this week, Khalifa Haftar's air forces attacked Mitiga Airport, breaking the Eid ceasefire. Meanwhile, the UN Special Envoy to Libya, Ghassan Salameh, has condemned the attacks on medical facilities in Tripoli. He said health workers, medical facilities and military ambulances have been attacked over 37 times since April. The WHO says Haftar's forces have killed over 1,000 people and displaced 120,000. The opposition Liberal Democrat Party has unveiled its candidates to lead an emergency UK government. Liberal Democrats leader Jo Swinson nominated former Labour Deputy Leader Harriet Harman and Tory veteran Kenneth Clarke. Rather than name party members, Swinson said the Liberal Democrats preferred alternative leaders for a unity government to stop a no-deal Brexit. She said the Labour and Conservative veterans agreed to assume the role. Earlier this month, Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn called for a no-confidence vote in Prime Minister Boris Johnson's government. Corbyn suggested he would subsequently lead a caretaker government and call a snap election. Liberal Democrat leader Swinson has refused to support Corbyn. The chief executive of Hong Kong's Cathay Pacific Airways, Rupert Hogg, has resigned over the involvement of employees in anti-government protests. Chief Customer and Commercial Officer Paul Liu has also stepped down, citing the same reasons. Cathay Pacific said new management is needed to restore people's confidence in the airline. It named Augustus Tang as the new chief executive. Earlier, China's aviation regulator warned Cathay Pacific to stop its staff from participating in Hong Kong's protests. It said the airline would not be allowed to fly to the mainland if it failed to act. It's time for a short break, but coming up next in the Bulletin. Welcome back. Greenland has dismissed the notion of its sale after reports said the US President Donald Trump repeatedly raised the idea of buying the Danish territory. Greenland's Foreign Minister Anne Leuenberger says the Arctic island is open for business but not for sale. Danish politicians have poured scorn on Trump's idea. Trump is due to visit Denmark in September. Greenland was long been coveted by world powers because of its strategic location in the northern Atlantic and natural resources. Denmark turned down a $100 million American offer for Greenland in 1946. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and his German counterpart Heiko Maas will meet next week to discuss global stability and security. Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova says the situation in Ukraine, Syria and Iran will be discussed. She says Lavrov and Maas will also discuss key issues in Russia-Germany relations and coordinate timetables for future contacts. Zakharova also said the possible withdrawal of the US from the World Trade Organization would affect people's quality of life around the world. She said Russia will help Kyrgyzstan progress towards stability. Italy's Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte has accused Deputy Prime Minister Matteo Salvini of disloyalty. Conte says Salvini is obsessed with blocking immigration, intensifying an open war of words in the ruling coalition. Conte used the case of a migrant boat standoff to settle scores with the leader of the League party. In an open letter, Conte said 6 EU states were ready to take in migrants aboard the open arms ship. Amongst others, he named France, Romania and Portugal as the countries he convinced. Conte said Salvini wanted to exploit the immigration issue for electoral gain rather than looking for solutions. Salvini hit back with his own open letter to Conte, saying his closed ports policy was working. Earlier, Salvini put forward a motion of no confidence in the ruling government coalition. One person has died and 49 others have been injured by a tropical storm pushing its way through parts of Japan. Japan's Met Agency says Storm Kurosa made landfall in southern Japan and is now moving towards north. It says Kurosa dropped up to 800 millimeters of rainfall in Hiroshima and Shimane prefectures. The agency has advised more than 400,000 people to evacuate the areas at risk. Around 800 flights and train services have been cancelled, sabotaging travel during the summer holiday season. The storm is expected to bring more heavy rain to northern parts of the country throughout Saturday. The death toll from a dengue outbreak in Bangladesh has risen to 93 in a little over a month. A health department report says almost 2,000 people have been infected with a mosquito-borne disease in the last 24 hours. It says nearly 8,000 people are being treated for the disease in hospital. The department further says over 48,000 people have been affected by the disease this year. 2 Ebola cases have been confirmed in the Democratic Republic of Congo's South Kivu region for the first time. Health officials say the cases open up a new front in the fight against the outbreak, which has killed over 1,800 people this year. Health officials and aid workers say the virus can establish a foothold in the densely populated urban center. Congo's first Ebola case was detected in mid-July. Since then, the World Health Organization has warned the spread of the disease could accelerate. Congo is taking steps to counter Ebola with the help of African Union and the UN. Thousands of policymakers from 180 countries will meet in Geneva tomorrow to try to tighten rules for the protection of endangered species. Specialists will evaluate changes to regulations and protection listings under the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. The convention's Secretary General Yvonne Huguero says the conference will seek to extend protection to additional species threatened by human activity. Discussions in Geneva will focus on the illegal trades in ivory, rhine horns, and endangered species amid growing alarm over accelerating extinction rates. The 4-decade-old treaty regulates trade in over 35,000 species of plants and animals. It also provides a mechanism to help crack down on illegal trades and impose sanctions on countries that break the rules. The meeting comes after a UN report said that 1 million species are on the brink of extinction. German and Swiss scientists have found abundant levels of microplastic pollution in snow. The scientists have warned of significant contamination of the atmosphere and demanded urgent research. A team from the Alfred Wegener Institute analyzed snow samples in Germany. The scientists confirmed snow in all places contains high concentrations of plastic fragments. The worst contamination was found in samples from a rural area in Germany's southern province of Bavaria, totaling 154,000 particles per liter. Researchers found particles of nitrile rubber, acrylates, and paints containing plastics in the samples. The United Nations estimates 100 million tons of plastic have been dumped in the oceans to the date. A French climber known around the world as Spider-Man has scaled a Hong Kong skyscraper using his bare hands. Alain Robert unfurled a banner urging peace in the city rocked by political unrest. Robert clambered up the Hong Kong Center for the third time without harnesses or ropes. His climb to the top of the 283-meter building attracted a huge crowd. Police say they arrested him after the stunt, which took about an hour. Robert described his climb as a contribution to promoting peace. An international effort is underway to put giraffes squarely on the global conservation agenda. The agenda has divided professional opinion, however. This report has the details.
Laikipia in central Kenya was once teeming with giraffes, but today it's becoming more difficult to spot them. Over the last 20 years, giraffe numbers have steadily declined in Kenya and across much of the African continent. The Samburu community has lived alongside giraffe for generations and killed the animal for food and medicine.
They use even the skin of the giraffe as some medicines. They used to have to cook them, they burn them, and they have that gas from the scrub from the skin. Then they use them as medicine. That's why sometimes why they used to kill them before.
Northern Kenya is home to a subspecies of giraffe that is becoming increasingly rare. Current estimates show that the population of these reticulated giraffes has declined by over 60% in 20 years. Simon and his colleagues are animal researchers who monitor giraffe life and behaviour. They collect data and help create conservation awareness among the communities that live around the animals.
There's been so many research done on lions, elephants and other species. But if you try to look at the giraffe, there's very little known about the giraffe. There's very little research done on the giraffe.
Across the African continent, the number of giraffes decreased by around 40% between 1985 and 2015 to some 98,000 individuals. Animal activists argue that the effects of international trade on the giraffe population are unknown and a study should be carried out to assess the need for regulation. The proposal would regulate the legal trade in giraffe parts obtained by trophy hunters in southern Africa. Observers are questioning the effectiveness of the measure, since most of the legal trade occurs in places where giraffe numbers are actually rebounding, like South Africa and Namibia, where game hunting is legal.
In the US, deep-fried corn dogs and democracy are mixing at the Iowa State Fair. It is expected over 1 million people will be at the event this year, which is a must-stop for 2020 presidential hopefuls. 23 Democrats and a long-shot Republican primary challengers to President Donald Trump will present their case to the people of Iowa during the fair's 11-day run. This report has the details.
Thanks for stopping by to vote.
Here at the Iowa State Fair, visitors can vote for their favorite presidential candidate, more than a year out from the 2020 elections. The ballots at this largely agricultural fair are corn kernels, and the many Democratic candidates are all represented. On the Republican side, Donald Trump appears all but guaranteed his party's nomination.
Trend today is all Republicans are voting for Donald Trump. All Democrats are split, mostly with Biden at 35%.
Nice to see you again.
The former vice president is the frontrunner in national polls and is treated like a movie star here. But even the less well-known candidates hit up the fair, with the hopes of making a name for themselves in this early voting state. The fair is a crucial way for candidates to connect with the voters who could make or break their presidential dreams, but not without a little fun, in the form of pig races and fried corn dog tastings. Mike is taking his voting responsibility very seriously. The environmental activist went to see every single Democratic candidate at the fair this year.
Yeah. I don't think it's dividing the party, but I think we need to start weeding some of them out to eliminate them. I think they need to self-select and say, I'm only a 1%.
The world where freedom...
In July 2020, the Democratic National Convention will finally reveal their pick to face Donald Trump. And this predominantly white and Christian state, whose population represents only 1% of voters in the U.S., will ultimately determine who stays in the race.
Lows and the highs of the business world now. European stock indices have risen after China said it will roll out more economic stimulus measures. Wall Street is also positive in early trading after Walmart reported better than expected second quarter earnings. Oil prices were boosted by investor optimism that central banks around the world would intervene to boost the growth. Germany's DAX and the CAC in Paris are up nearly 1%, driven by a rally in semiconductor stocks. The FTSE 100 has also gained more than 0.5% after a technical fall delayed trading. In New York, the Dow Jones Industrial Average and S&P 500 are up a fraction. Brent and US crude oil futures are also trading 1.5% higher. Earlier gains in Asia were restrained by fears of the trade war between China and the US and its global impact. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index closed 1% higher on strong corporate earnings by leading consumer brands. The Shanghai Composite also gained fractionally, but Australia's ASX and Nikkei 225 in Tokyo were flat. And now the weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For further updates, stay tuned to Indus News.